基因改造食物 （genetically modified food） 就係利用現代分子生物技術，將某啲生物嘅基因 DNA 轉移到其他嘅物種內，改造原本生物同植物嘅遺傳物質，使到其形狀、營養、品質、先天特性等方面按住科學家所需要嘅目標而轉變，從而形成當今嘅基因改造食物，或者作為加工原料生產嘅食品。農作物喺基因改造時，往往都加入外來基因，基因重組技術導入，冇物種界限，可以用動物或者植物、微生物取出嘅基因，常係人類及動物、植物混亂交換加入，其造成嘅影響，而家睇嚟仍然係未知之數，有啲甚至係好幾十年之後先至會顯現或者突然爆發。其中孟山都 Monsanto 就係全世界主要研究基因工程嘅公司。喺成為生命科學公司之前，孟山都係世界知名嘅化工公司，包括多氯聯苯 PCB、著名嘅農藥滴滴替 DDT、毀滅性嘅除草劑，即美國喺越南戰爭為咗驅趕藏匿山區嘅越共士兵，喺1962至1970年噴灑2113萬6千加侖嘅落葉骨或稱橙劑 Agent Orange， 造成越南至少50萬名畸形兒童以及癌症嘅病人。呢啲人人避之、唯恐不及嘅動物，都係與孟山都呢一個生命科學公司有關。及至2005年，孟山都隨之成為全世界第一大種子公司，其主要生產嘅產品有基因工程嘅生長激素、年春 Roundup 除草劑、基因改造作物種子，包括大豆、粟米、棉花、向日葵、油菜、糖精阿斯巴甜。事實上，如今大部分基改作物都含有抗害蟲或者內除草劑嘅基因，以大豆、粟米、棉花及油菜花為主。基因工程科學家當為農作物植入抗蟲基因後，農作物會自行製造殺蟲劑，藉口可望減少化學藥劑嘅噴灑。至於現時常見嘅基因改造食物包括例子1，比目魚體內嘅某個基因有防凍作用，科學家將佢抽出植入西瓜內，於是就製造出新品種嘅內含西瓜。呢種西瓜以及含有呢一種西瓜成分嘅冰棒，則係基因改造食物。例子2，含有蠍子基因嘅粟米。例子3，含有北極魚基因嘅番茄。例子4，基因改造出嚟嘅金色米。例子5，經過基因改造後嘅梅子可以抵抗蚜蟲病。其他當今嘅基因改造食物例子仲有當追溯基因改造食物嘅歷史，早喺1983年，世界上首宗個案基因改造植物，一種含有抗生素藥類抗體嘅煙草，喺美國成功培植。1992年，中國率先喺大田生產上種植礦黃瓜花葉病毒基因改造煙草，成為世界第一個商品化種植基因改造作物嘅國家。1994年，美國食品及藥品管理局 FDA 允許基因改造番茄喺市面銷售。此後，抗蟲棉花同粟米、抗除草劑大豆同油菜等10餘種基因改造植物獲准商品化生產並上市銷售。2000年，由於黃金大米嘅誕生，科學家先至關注到所謂基因改造食品喺營養學上嘅價值。2012年，全球基因改造作物種植面積高達約 1.7 億公頃。按照種植面積統計，全球超過 91% 嘅大豆、85% 嘅粟米、80至85% 嘅油菜花同88% 嘅棉花係基因改造產品。可見近2年基因改造食物已經進入瘋狂嘅境界。美國同歐洲揭發基因改造食品黑幕嘅作家傑弗瑞史密斯 Jeffrey Smith， 其中佢嘅著作《欺騙的種子》揭發政府不想面對、企業不讓你知道的基因改造滅種黑幕中， 揭發生物科技公司運用雄厚財力影響政府官員同研究者嘅立場，並透過媒體持續鼓吹基改食品嘅安全性。事實上，基因改造食物嘅破壞性影響極為深遠。
Well, in the U.S., 91% of the soy is genetically engineered, 85% of the corn, 87% of the cotton, and a large percentage of the canola, although canola is mostly grown in Canada, about 80 to 85% of the canola, and about 95% of the sugar beets. Now, the Hawaiian papaya, I would say the majority, and for zucchini and yellow squash, very little, but some. And also it's a smaller percentage for corn on the cob. It's not 85% of corn on the cob, it's a smaller percentage. Fortunately, popcorn is not genetically engineered, so you're safe eating popcorn.
The evidence continues to build that genetically engineered foods are a clear threat to public health, and Jeffrey Smith recommends proactive action by taking steps to avoid these unnatural products.
When GMOs were largely introduced in 1996, 7% of Americans had 3 or more chronic illnesses. 9 years later, it was 13%. Food allergies doubled in less time. Food-related illnesses doubled 7 years from 94 to 2001. Autism has been on the increase, obesity, diabetes. There's so many things that can go wrong and do go wrong in the process of creating a GMO. On top of that, you have the Bt toxin. On top of that, you have the extra herbicides they were eating because of the high residues in the crop. Any of those problems could easily have been associated with GMOs. Soon after GM soy was introduced to the UK, soy allergies skyrocketed by 50%. There's many reasons why GM soy might be the culprit there. So I say, well, we don't have to wait around till the research is done. We can opt out of that experiment. And there's many doctors that are now prescribing non-GMO diets. The process of genetically engineering a crop is inherently unsafe. You take a gene, let's say you want to create a corn plant that produces its own pesticide. So you take the gene from the soil bacterium Bt, and you make millions of copies of the gene, and you put it into a gun, and you shoot that gun into a plate of millions of cells, hoping that some of the genes make it into the DNA of some of those cells. Then you clone those cells into a plant. Now the process of insertion plus cloning causes massive collateral damage in the DNA of the plant. 2 to 4% is different. There can be hundreds or thousands of mutations. And there's also a holistic effect when you insert a single gene. Up to 5% of the natural genes in the plant can change their levels of expression and produce too much or too little protein. What this does when you change that much in the DNA is that the RNAs can change, the proteins can change, and the byproducts of metabolism can change. So you could have increased levels of allergens, increased levels of toxins or carcinogens, or completely new allergens and toxins and carcinogens that have never been in the plant before. Now these are not evaluated. We discovered that, there's a known allergen in soy called trypsin inhibitor, which is as much as 7 times higher in cooked GM soy compared to cooked non-GM soy. In one study comparing GM soy with the wild variety, the GM soy had an allergen that wasn't supposed to be there, and the people can react to a skin prick test to GM soy, but not to non-GM soy. The corn that they looked at after it was on the market, there's normally a gene in corn that's switched off. Well, it was accidentally switched on. And what does it produce? A known allergen. Both corn and soy produce lignin, which is a woody compound, but the process of the plant producing the lignin also produces a plant pesticide called rotenone, which is linked to Parkinson's disease. So GMOs might increase Parkinson's disease, but we don't know because, of course, they're not checking.
Apart from the injuring of our health, there is the very real danger that these genetically engineered mutant plants will cross-pollinate with wild varieties of the same species, thus passing on their unnatural genetic material with unpredictable consequences to the biosphere.
But the bigger picture may be far worse because we have no technology to fully clean up the self-propagating genetic pollution which has been let out of the bag already. the genes that we've been introducing to these species that are not part of the years of evolution of the species, but part of like an overnight transformation because of shooting a gene gun into a plate of cells, these new organisms and the gene pool contamination is permanent. These genes are going to be with us, outlasting the effects of global warming and nuclear waste. They are part of our landscape now. So the corn has already contaminated the indigenous corn varieties of Mexico. I mean, imagine trying to do a recall on genetically modified mosquitoes from the air. It's impossible. Same thing with the gene pool. The Bt toxin-created products, for example, they discovered after they were on the market that it's exuded by the roots and it binds with the clay in the soil, and it can stay active for months or years, and it could adversely affect the soil microorganisms. It can be washed into water and then down the stream, and then it adversely affects the caddisfly, which is a part of the ecosystem.
Monsanto scientists found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump near their factory in the presence of Roundup herbicide. Now, Roundup normally kills bacteria. This bacteria was surviving. They said, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene from the bacterium that allowed it to survive the Roundup and put it into soybeans. And now those Roundup-ready soybeans can be sprayed with Roundup herbicide, and they don't die, just all of the other plant biodiversity in the ground dies. The active ingredient in Roundup is called glyphosate. Glyphosate was patented in 1964, not as an herbicide, but as a broad-spectrum chelator. It hugs a lot of different minerals that are needed and does not allow the plants to access them. It also destroys some beneficial microorganisms in the soil, which normally provide nutrients to the plant. It also promotes pathogenic organisms in the soil, which then overrun the plant. And so it creates weaker plants, stronger disease, and the disease does the killing. Now, what do the livestock in the United States eat? They eat largely Roundup-ready crops. Roundup-ready soy, corn, cottonseed, canola mash, sugar beet pulp, and soon alfalfa. So a huge percentage of their food intake is Roundup-ready crops. Now remember, Roundup pulls the nutrients out of the crop. It makes them unavailable. So now we have millions of livestock eating nutrient-deficient food. And what do we eat? We eat plants and we eat animals and take their milk. So it turns out it's a perfect storm now, not just for plant disease, but for animal and human disease. When 44,000 secret FDA memos were made public from a lawsuit about the subject of genetic engineering, the director of the Center for Veterinary Medicine made it absolutely clear that GMOs in animal feed had a unique danger. Toxins can bioaccumulate in animals and in their milk. And so if there were toxins in genetically modified feed, then we might have higher levels of those toxins in the animals that eat the feed or in their milk or other products from those animals.
All our food, 90% of Canadian crops, American crops now are produced by genetic modification, or at least they're contaminated with genetically modified corn, genetically modified soybean, genetically modified everything.
95% of all the genetic modifications are done in order to allow the plants to survive more chemicals being sprayed on them and to allow the animals to survive more drugs being put into them. And of course what happens is that when their genes are changed, our genes are changed by consuming them, just as the superweeds and the superbugs are genetically altered by consuming them. The bug eats the plant, its genes change. The animal eats the plant, its genes change. We eat the animal or the plant, our genes change. Our babies' genes change. And the change is permanent.
關於基因改造食品嘅破壞性影響，仍然係一個無底深淵。雖然基因改造食品藉催生加速農作物嘅成長，但卻可能改變原有作物營養消失，或係添加種種非天然嘅毒素、過敏原，導致人類嘅長期食用後改變身體荷爾蒙正常分泌，產生對食物過敏或者免疫系統失調， 進而破壞人體新陳代謝途徑，導致基因突變嘅機率上升。有啲科學家擔心，好多基因改造農作物都移植咗抗蟲害嘅基因，可能產生新嘅過敏原、新嘅毒素，甚至可能製造一啲抗藥性及難以治療嘅超級病毒。以下係一啲基因改造食品嘅有關報導。1980年後期，美國曾發生一種人體所必需嘅氨基酸 tryptophan 中毒事件。原來食品製造商日本 Showa Denko 公司喺基改工程中參入大量細菌製造，並將產品銷售美國。因 tryptophan 超量累積後衍生出毒性物質，導致數個月後有37人死亡及1500人嘅終身健康受損。2005年5月22日，英國獨立報披露咗基因改造研發巨頭孟山都公司嘅一份秘密報告。據報告顯示，食咗基因改造粟米嘅老鼠，血液同腎臟中會出現異常。2007年3月，路透社報導，設於法國巴黎環保團體綠色和平組織委託研究機構做實驗，針對美國 Monsanto 所開發嘅 MON863 基改粟米，每日餵食老鼠。90日後，被餵食老鼠證實喺肝臟同腎臟出現毒性反應 （Signs of Toxicity）。佢哋將研究發表於 Archives of Environmental Contamination and Technology 期刊上。2012年9月19日，法國研究團隊公佈指出，終生餵食孟山都 Monsanto 公司嘅基因改造穀物，或暴露喺孟山都最暢銷除草劑 Roundup 下嘅小老鼠，被發現罹患腫瘤及多重器官損害，甚至早死。法國政府已要求衛生監管機構展開調查。的確，基因改造食物原來就係敵基督將要掌握全世界嘅陰謀。詳情亦將會喺接落嚟2012榮耀盼望信息詳細分享。